Hello and welcome back to Kerbal Space Program, episode 30 of my NASA series reboot. Finally ran into what I said I would when I first started the KS assembly program. I've got a payload that is too large in diameter for the shuttle. So it's coming up on a Delta style rocket. This is the Kibo laboratory, which is in real life the Japanese Space Agency's ISS module. It's actually a two-part module, and the second part is shuttle deliverable, but I have to get the base lab installed with the Delta rocket because this is a station science laboratory module, so it's too large a diameter to actually fit the shuttle payload bay. The mass really isn't an issue. If this were tweak scale compatible, I know I could shrink it down, put it in the shuttle, and bring it up without any problems. As it is, I decided to build a kind of specialized launch and installation vehicle. I didn't want to sacrifice an entire tank of RCS fuel, one of the big 3.75 meter RCS tanks, so I just stuck 5 of those radial mount cylindrical tanks on the bottom near one of those Atlas low profile engines. Got a really good rendezvous out of this one, launched it at pretty much the opportune moment to only spend about 3 hours in-game time, under time warp obviously, chasing this thing down till we make our rendezvous. Once that's done, pretty much one of the easiest docking maneuvers of the entire game. It's always easier putting things together like this than it is trying to manhandle with the shuttle, but building things with the shuttle isn't too terrible, so. And I'd been trying to keep those solar panels oriented to the sun, but to get things oriented correctly with the station, this is one of the rare moments where I had to turn them out of plane, and one of them was edge on to the sun practically, so it wasn't putting out much charge. It was enough to keep the thing from dying, but the other one was completely hidden by the body. It's a rather beefy laboratory module there. So we get that installed. It's a matter of just ejecting the delivery vehicle and going for a deorbit. And this is actually, I broke my save file here because I got cocky and I forgot to, I refused to do my quick save, quick load thing that I do whenever I undock from the station. I just headed straight back to the Space Center after setting my periaps below the surface of the planet, and that pretty much broke the game. I had to spend a couple days rebuilding and getting back into it, and at the end of the day I had to fly that delivery a second time. Thankfully I got things restored enough for the Duna Global Surveyor to finally arrive. And this time I was a little smarter about planning my reentry orbit, or my insertion orbit, beforehand, where you could do it from minimal delta V. And I started getting confused because it had been such a long time since I'd messed with this satellite. I looked at my staging and I saw I only had the one engine, and I forgot how I'd actually planned on this thing maneuvering itself. And you see me digging in there, hoping against hope that the game has glitched out and there's an engine hidden in there somewhere. Blew past the maneuver node just a little bit. When I saw that RCS tank there, though, I remembered what I'd done. To keep things a little more realistic, most satellites are propelled and maneuvered using a hypergolic RCS system. So I just put some of those linear RCS ports on this thing in order to give it some maneuvering capability, but I didn't want to devote the weight of an engine and a liquid and oxidizer fuel tank to it. Go ahead and make a big correction so we can get right down to the meat of the mission. And the whole purpose of this is the Kethane scanner. That's the only instrument it has on board because I need to start planning my landing sites for my Constellation mission. And it's going to have to be in a site that has access to Kethane and is not a terribly unreasonable distance from several other biomes. It's going to be a ways off, but we're getting into pretty much the final stages of planning, and pretty soon we're going to have to start building and orbiting hardware and eventually sending the pre-supply missions out. So we're definitely getting down to the beginning of the end, as they say, for this series. Go ahead and turn suborbital so we can dump this transfer stage. Fold those up so we don't have any collider issues. Then extend them, delete the adapter, and fire up the RCS jets. Actually had some pretty good acceleration from these things. You can see pretty rapidly got the periaps up from suborbital to just about circular. I had to make another pass because I drifted so far beyond the apoaps. It was going to start making the orbit a little more eccentric than I'd like. Wanted to keep it rather circularized. But after several days, I set a timer for 50 days. It shows 28 days remaining. So after 22 days of scanning, we pretty much had the entirety of Duna mapped, or as much as I was willing to waste time doing. I didn't think there would be any deposits hiding out in those single hex spaces, so decided this would be good enough for us to start comparing elevation and biome maps and Kethane scan maps to figure out the ideal place to send our Constellation exploration mission. And since I have neglected to do so until now, I decided it was probably an opportune time to install the first Soyuz on the KSS. I had to modify it to make it unmanned capable, and this is an entirely unmanned flight. It's just installing itself on the station, standby in case of emergencies. Launching aboard a rather small Proton. Doesn't really take a lot to kick this thing into orbit. Main engine cut off and just coast until it gets out of the atmosphere before blowing the fairings. There's a lot of night launches on this episode, I've noticed. Once clear of the 70-kilometer mark, fairings are blown to expose the Soyuz. Dump the booster. Start deploying solar panels and communications equipment. And then igniting the main engine. Deploying the docking adapter. And I think on my next playthrough, I would really like to try the KOS mod, which is Kerbal Operating System. It allows you to program and automate probes and things. And I'm not a programmer by nature, but I've got to take a couple programming classes for my engineering major. So I'd like to experiment a little bit. I used to do free space scripting back in the day when free space was a thing. And I got fairly proficient at that, but that's really just setting up if-then statements. It's not actually programming as far as I know. Cut out the tedious wait to make the rendezvous, but once again, kept it under a day to catch the station. And I hadn't really paid attention to where that antenna was going to deploy onto, or out to. It was a little too long to make the docking I was hoping for, so I ended up having to retract that before making the final dock. Blow off our last bit of relative velocity and then come in a lot slower. I really enjoyed docking, flying these type of missions. They're a nice break from the Space Shuttle because the Shuttle is a pretty big investment in time and effort, because you're not just launching a rocket, you're launching a rocket and flying an aircraft while trying to keep it from burning itself up on reentry or exceeding the G tolerance and wrecking the whole thing. Space Station receives its automated orientation command. I still have not put a living crew up on this thing, although with the installation of the Kibo module, I can actually start running some science experiments on board. It's a pretty good idea to stop it wobbling too much before it shakes itself apart. Which is still a risk because it's not the sturdiest thing, and those reaction wheels are so powerful. It's they're much more powerful than the control moment gyroscopes on the ISS, so they could potentially shake the thing to pieces. And the flight computer from Remote Tech does not seem to be very sympathetic as to how delicate your structure is, and will just whip it around at maximum torque, which gets to be a little disconcerting. Trying to get it oriented as perfectly as possible, not that it matters, but trying to get points for neatness. And then I start really paying attention to the antenna, and it was going to collide with some things. So roll it in. With the convex surface of the docking module that it's attaching to, really not going to have to worry about too many collisions. In case of emergency, 5 Kerbals will be able to make it to the Soyuz, but however, it'll only be able to bring 3 of them back. So a rescue will have to be sent to extract the other 2. But I'm really not foreseeing any emergencies in the space station. Pretty much anything that goes wrong, will be self-inflicted. So, and I'll try to keep from doing anything on purpose. Use the action groups to pull in the solar panels. Unfortunately, the antenna was on the same action group, so when I toggled them, it extended again. Had to manually retract it. This is the current configuration of the KSS as it stands today. Not in real life, obviously. Once again, looking rather nice. Really can't wait to have this thing done. To an extent, I'm basically just killing time between Duna transit orbits, or transfer windows, and waiting for the Voyager to make it to Joule. But trying to make this as interesting as possible, so it's not just killing time. And another nighttime launch of the Space Shuttle Avalon. Unfortunately, what nobody noticed was shortly after takeoff, the Space Shuttle loses its right outer aileron. After further review, none of the cameras at the Space Center happened to catch it. It's suspected to have been foam shedding from the main tank that knocked the flight surface off. Which is a fancy way of me saying I was so focused on the Navball that I have no idea how I lost that aileron, and in fact, I was not even aware I had lost it until much later. I just noticed that the roll authority was a lot more sluggish than it typically is. And I honestly don't know how it came off. I may have clipped the launch tower on the way up, or it may have been a glitch, and may have never actually loaded into the model when I sent it to the launch pad. I couldn't be 100% certain that it was a glitch, so instead of using my get out of glitch free card and saving and reloading, I resolved myself to fly this as it was. Decided to do most of the launch and rendezvous in IVA view, and that also contributed to me not being aware of my problem until much later, because honestly I'm not looking at the exterior of the shuttle. Slowly clawing into space, finally getting some positive movement on the apoaps. Pitching over a little lower to get some more horizontal velocity. Yeah, suddenly occurred to me I haven't actually done a whole lot with the IVA on the shuttle, and so I decided to set myself up a little challenge to use it more thoroughly on this mission. Just so happened that I had a problem with the spacecraft I was not aware of. Got the apoap set to about where I wanted it. Engage the external camera so we could make sure the main tank has a clean separation. Pan it down a little further. And the tank is released and the space shuttle translates away. Fisheye effect really distorts the tank, I've noticed. Well, it distorts anything at close zooms, which is kind of cool. Start configuring the tanks for the OMS system. Then about 2.5 hours later, we're making rendezvous with the space station, or at least bringing the intercept range down as low as possible. Going to take approximately one more orbit to make it back in. And it took me a while to find the menu that actually had the rendezvous information for RasterPropMonitor. I was starting to panic that I would have to switch to external view for this, but eventually dug through enough menus that I found that. So I have cameras in the cargo bay. I can watch the deployment. Unfortunately, I completely messed this up, ended up bumping the payload once again and sending it tumbling, which made it pretty much impossible to grab. So we deployed the payload specialist to try and arrest the rotation. And I didn't disable the flag on the module, so it's going to be carrying the space shuttle's name in perpetuity. Still not aware that I've lost a flight surface. Just a matter of lining up with both Navyfish's docking alignment indicator and the docking camera. The Navyfish docking alignment indicator really does make all docking cameras redundant. The only thing it can't do is look as cool, which is a rather important consideration on a video game. So I intend to use both of them as much as possible. Switching to what is now the furthermost docking adapter and targeting the KSS so we can make the part installation. After several minutes slowly drifting in, finally get close enough to start thinking about actually attaching. Have to reorient the space shuttle so the vertical stabilizer doesn't hit the main spine of the station when we go to install this, which is weird, which was difficult because the payload, the docking adapter I'm actually trying to control from, is rotated 180 degrees out from the shuttle's normal. Just as an extra precaution, decided to draw in those solar panels. And at this point, control is switched over to the payload specialist for installation of the module. This is all 4 times normal speed, but little tedious installation here. The alignment really doesn't matter too much because there's nothing going to be attached to this thing on the outer, and there's not any like facing to really give away that it's on incorrectly. But being me, I still try to get the alignment as perfect as possible. Watching both cameras at once. Although, and honestly, I was actually watching the docking camera, figuring I could admire the view through the cargo bay camera once I got this thing recorded and published. With Kibo complete, we deploy the main solar panels. Apparently had plenty of clearance. And it was pretty much at that stage that I discovered my issues with the control surfaces. And I had to quickly, well, not really quickly, but I had a decision to make. I could, A, try to bring this thing back, B, fly up another shuttle to retrieve the crew and maybe install some autonomous remote flight capability onto the shuttle to allow it to bring itself back, which would, if I lost it, I just lost the shuttle. But since I'm trying to space things about 50 days between launches, I actually didn't have the life support to make it. So the decision is made to bring the shuttle back intact with its crew. If things go wrong, there's always the remote possibility of ditching the spacecraft. Slowly translating away from the station for what could be the final time. And this time I did not forget. I did do the quick save, quick load, because I was going to have enough trouble as it is. I didn't want any other potential glitches rearing their ugly heads. I even considered moving the crew into the station and returning with the Soyuz. But that was less than ideal because frankly, I just installed it and I didn't want to have to fly another one up there to replace it so soon. You can see how long it takes to load when I've got that massive station and the shuttle in close proximity to one another. Finally get that out of the way and start preparing for the retro burn. Going to try to come in from as low an altitude as we can manage with our available fuel load. So periaps comes down to 86 kilometers, and then we brought it down to another, we circularized at 86. I cut out all of the boring maneuvering because this video was running long on time, and I didn't want this mission to come in, I didn't want the return to come in at the beginning of the next episode because trying to troubleshoot and survive a crisis here. Once again, releasing the disposable docking node in Kerbin's atmosphere, so it'll burn up and dispose of itself. Then stow everything and close the cargo bay. For the most part, the flight control system on the Space Shuttle was able to keep it oriented pretty level for most of the return, even without that aileron. But once it got into the thicker atmosphere at much higher speeds, the left wing had a surprisingly higher amount of lift than the right wing, and so I was fighting a constant dip. Normally on a shuttle return, this part of the flight is just flown on SAS with some maybe minor pitch adjustments made, but this was pretty much all manual with just the SAS damping out any extreme overcorrections. And the crew had resolved themselves that before they hit 10,000 meters, if things were going terrible, they would attempt to slow the vessel as much as possible and abandon it on the way down. Because under 10,000 meters, it was going to be pretty much impossible to survive anything that goes wrong. It would happen so quickly. However, Raylan, keeping a steady hand at the controls, was able to maneuver the shuttle and keep it relatively stable as it passed through 17,000 meters. Getting closer to the final abort phase. Just about lost it a couple times. And at this point, speed starts to become a very big issue because having to make large adjustments to roll and even trying to keep the nose up while under high dynamic pressure really raises the probability of tearing the spacecraft apart on the return. 2,000 meters left to go before a final decision can no longer be made on a abort and ditching of the shuttle. With the control oscillations back under control, the decision is made to ride this in to the bitter end, regardless of the ending. Even under less than ideal circumstances, the shuttle's flight control systems are making a valiant effort to keep it level. However, an attempt on the runway has been completely ruled out at this stage. There's too many things that could potentially go wrong, and with the limited amount of maneuverability the shuttle has at this stage, it is much safer to aim for the grass alongside and in front of the runway. It's a much larger area. Trying to keep the nose down to keep from losing too much horizontal speed, but at the same time not trying to keep from diving too steeply. At 3,300 meters, the prognosis looks good enough to warrant lowering the landing gear. Trying to aim so it can take up as much of the grass as possible without simultaneously clipping the hills just to the west of KSC. Shuttle's actually remarkably controllable at this stage. I was quite surprised. And at this point, I figured the worst was behind me, so really need to just set it down gently. Unfortunately, those stupid planes on the runway caused the physics loading freeze at some rather terrifying moments. But under less than ideal circumstances, Raylan Kerman performs a landing that Jebediah himself would be proud of. So thank you for watching, stay tuned, and we'll have further episodes in the future.